Hey guys, my name's Josh. I'm from Pet Paradise. We're doing a Tarantula Care video today. In this video we're just going to go over some of the simple necessities for taking care of tarantulas. We're not going to go into too much hair-splitting details. I've been working with these animals since I was a kid, both with my personal collection and here through the store. I've had the rare opportunity to have a lot of hands-on experience with some very rare species and some just overall amazing animals. So I'm going to pass on some of that knowledge to you guys today. I promise not to make it too boring or too drawn out. First we'll talk about tarantula cages. I've set up a few examples here. These would be for your younger tarantulas, bigger slings or juveniles. The reason I chose these three cages is because they actually show you three different types of cages you can set up. Number one would be an arboreal setup, number two would be a burrowing setup, number three would be a terrestrial setup. Now when you start with the arboreal setup, you notice the bottom of it's pretty bare bones. There's not a huge amount of substrate in there. Then I have some decorations that go all the way up to the top of the tank, so you could use this for like young pink toes or other species that would do a little bit more climbing, and it'll be much more suitable to their needs. This one here is going to be tall, but it's mostly filled up with substrate. You notice there's almost no furniture in there, there's no caves, there's no decorations. That's because most of your burrowing species are going to create their own shelters, especially at a young age, so you don't necessarily need to give them a cave. Then you have your third type here. This is, for a terrestrial. You can use this for a young terrestrial spiderling. You just have a little cave provided, so it's a little safe shelter for them. And then a thin amount of substrate. You don't need a terribly thick amount of substrate because they're not going to do too much burrowing, depending on what species you put in there. Now, these cages are very ideal for young spiders, of course. You kind of follow the same principles in setting up a larger cage. We have several different tanks available on the market these days. Whether they have a full ventilated top or whether you end up making your own and putting holes in them. These ones, for instance, I use a plastic bit and a drill, and I just drill in ventilation holes as needed. The nice thing about creating your own cages like this is that you have a lot of control over how much ventilation your cage has. For some species, they do better with a lot of ventilation, and some species do better with a little bit of ventilation. So these are some examples of cages you could use for adults. They're not necessarily set up, I just wanted to put them out here for example. The downside of a lot of the commercially available tanks is that they do have a completely ventilated top, so they have a completely sectioned off, screened off top, including your plastic cages, a lot of your glass cages. That's just how they come. Now you can make some adjustments to that, like cut material to sit on a certain portion of that screen to cover up some of the humidity that's escaping, but overall it's not going to be quite as perfect as some of those little plastic cages that you can drill the holes in specifically to allow how much ventilation you specifically want. Alright, so I wanted to take a minute and talk about the different types of substrates that you can use. There's a bunch that are available on the market. To be honest, I've only found a few that are truly what I would call perfect. So I have, for instance, Cocoa Soft makes a cocoa fiber. Now this is a wonderful product because it is all organic. It's not compressed into a brick like a lot of the other brands that you see out there. They compress it into a brick, and you actually have to use a brining process to do so, and that takes away a lot of your natural beneficial features. So I'll use this as a cage bottom for almost every single tarantula I keep. It holds up really well to burrowing, and it's much more absorbent than the other, like the Eco Earth and stuff like that, that's available on the market. The other substrate that I use big time is sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is a very good natural substrate. This is actually really good for all your high humidity species. What I'll use this is I'll put it in the corner of the cage, I'll put it underneath the caves. Anywhere I want a little extra humidity, I'll stack this up, or you can even take it and grind it up and add it to your cocoa fiber, and it'll just add some more absorbent features to your bedding. Both of these products have natural tannins in them that fight off bacterial growth, mold, all kind of stuff like that. Really good substrates. I have these available on my online store and in my store, of course. They can be a little harder to find than other substrates, but feel free to give me a holler and I'll get some out to you. Alright, so I'm going to take a second to talk about temperatures and humidity for tarantulas. The beautiful thing about tarantulas is they're actually quite simple when it comes to temperature requirements. Anywhere from 75 to 80 degrees is ideal. They'll even tolerate temperatures as low as 70 degrees, so most people's houses are perfectly fine just the way they are. You'll find that adding heat to a tank has more downsides than it does upsides, so overall I don't recommend adding heat to your enclosures. As far as humidity is concerned, that's a little bit more important. You'll find that varies a little species to species. Depending on whether it's a tropical species or a species that comes from a more arid environment where there's less humidity, but you will find that no matter what species it is, they do require a certain amount of humidity in the cage. So with your tropical species, you'll be misting the cage anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week, and then with your arid species, the ones that stay drier, you even just put a little bit of water in the corner of the enclosure just to add a little humidity to the tank, just to make sure that they're going to go through molts appropriately, and to make sure that they have enough humidity for daily function. Alright guys, next I'm going to talk about feeding and watering your pet tarantula. As far as baby tarantulas go, or spiderlings go, there's no reason to offer a water dish. They will get all the hydration they need for you misting or adding water to the enclosure as necessary. Once they get to a juvenile or adult stage, you have the option to add a water bowl. I do offer one to most of my adult tarantulas here, but it's not 100% necessary. Especially some of your dry, arid species are going to prefer not to have a water dish. Sometimes they'll bury it with substrate trying to adjust their environment. So you'll find that you might pull water dishes out after having them in there for a week or two, just pretty much deeming them irrelevant. As far as feeding goes, what you feed your spiders has a big deal to do with their health. There are a wide array of different feeders available on the market these days, which is awesome, but a lot of them aren't very suitable for tarantulas. I stick with my basic 2, which are crickets and roaches. Your other available feeders, such as mealworms, superworms, a lot of your other worm-type feeders on the market are actually very high in fat and actually not that nutritious for tarantulas to eat. So I found that crickets are some of the best staple feeders, and I do an occasional roach just to kind of put a little weight on them when I need to. As far as frequency of feeding, I found that almost every tarantula can do fairly well on a weekly routine, especially if you're kind of new to tarantulas. I definitely recommend doing 1 day a week. Just pick that day. You offer a couple appropriately sized feeders, and if he doesn't eat it within 24 to 48 hours, I would take the feeders out so it doesn't stress out the animal any more than he might be. Most cases, if they're not eating, it's because they're either stressed or they're getting ready to molt. Either case, you want to make sure that extra feeders are removed from the cage. Big thing is not to overfeed your tarantulas. I found that every 5 to 7 days is perfectly suitable, whether it's a spiderling or a full-grown adult. So last but not least, we're going to talk about handling your tarantulas. Now, I personally don't recommend handling any tarantulas on a regular basis, as I don't feel that any tarantula truly looks forward to being handled, but there are certain species on the market that are more tolerable to it than others. This, for instance, is your typical rose hair. Rose hairs are going to be fairly reliable, but even then, any rose hair can have a bad day, throw up a threat posture, and try to bite you. Now, when you do handle these guys, you want to be very gentle. You notice I'm just letting him move on me. I might give him a little bump on his abdomen or the back leg just to get him to walk, but I'm not grabbing him. I'm not necessarily putting any pressure on him. For instance, I've got another very common and handleable species here, a pink-toe tarantula. These guys tend to be a little faster. This girl's pretty calm, so she probably won't come running or nothing. But once again, when you go to handle these guys, you want to keep it to a very limited basis. You don't want to do it every single day. You don't want to overstress your animal. Always make sure you research the animal before you handle it, and I almost never recommend handling your spiders when they're young. You want to wait till they're an adult animal and they're a little less vulnerable and a little less sensitive.